and 1.5 billion children worldwide. In 2020, the FBI reported a 69% increase in complaints to the Internet Crime Complaint Center, and the FBI and CISA warned the public of reported attacks on virtual environments. So in 2022, the Human Rights Watch published a study in which they found that 89% of EdTech platforms collected and shared student data with 196 third-party companies, mostly EdTech. And in response, the Federal Trade Commission issued a policy statement asserting that EdTech companies cannot require students to give up their privacy in exchange for online learning, and that EdTech must comply with COPPA rules. So in the paper, the definition of child is every human below the age of 18 years. Now, the goal of the paper is to provide the key stakeholders listed here with an overview of the latest research, policies, practices, and open issues, including the efforts to keep K-12 children safe while learning online. So the methods I used in the research were academic literature review, web search, and policy review. And I used Google Scholar and Google Search. And most sources I try to keep 2020 or later. And the research was based on answering the key questions in the following section, which we'll get to in a moment. And these are just some example search terms that were used. So these are the key questions that were addressed in the paper. So the first question is, what are the online privacy and security risks to K-12 children? So there were some, when schools went on lockdown, many were unprepared to handle this new reliance on IT infrastructure like educational technology tools and video conferencing tools. So as a result, there were cases where schools circumvented data security and privacy laws. And also, this resulted in a larger attack surface due to all the different tools being used. Now, there were many different methods of attacks, such as ransomware, denial of service, doxing, and so on, as well as data breaches that involved academic records, personally identifiable information, login credentials, and other types of data. There were also instances of online classroom invasions, so this is also known as digital hijacking, in which students were harassed and harmful content was broadcast during video conferencing classrooms. In addition, there were instances of data surveillance. For instance, EdTech there was an instance of Google for online classroom tools that were collecting biometric data from students, and it resulted in a lawsuit allegedly in violation of COPPA and the Illinois Biometric Privacy Information Act. And so these kinds of data breaches can result in physical, emotional, and financial harm. So the next question I asked was what is the cybersecurity awareness level among K-12 students? So I found a few studies from around the world. In general, children tend to not show a significant amount of cybersecurity and online safety knowledge. So, and also in Scotland, they found that financially deprived students performed worse in pass-through knowledge and recall, even when they were taking the same curriculum as their more affluent peers. So a child's cybersecurity knowledge and skills may also be influenced by socioeconomic status. Now, the next question I asked are, what are the policies, practices, and recommendations for protecting K-12 students' privacy and security? There are many different policies, and I listed some examples here, including FERPA, which requires federally funded schools to protect personally identifiable information in student records. However, there are some open issues with this, such as it does not directly address the use of educational technology tools. Now, COPPA protects data privacy and security of children under 13. And one issue with this is that ed tech companies have been found to violate COPPA rules. For instance, there were many teacher-approved apps in the Google App Store that were found to be in violation of COPPA. Now, California's SOPIPA prohibits online vendors from using or selling student data for targeted ads. And criticism of this is that even though ed tech companies such as Google have signed the Student Privacy Pledge to uphold the principles of SOPIPA in other states, they are not necessarily held accountable to the law because of lack of federal oversight. Now, the K-12 Cybersecurity Act signed in 2021 requires CISA to study K-12 cybersecurity issues and provide a set of guidelines and online training for school leaders. A criticism of this is that they're recommendations and not legal requirements, and there may possibly be an issue with adequate funding for these schools to be able to implement these recommendations. Now, outside of the U.S., there is the GDPR, which requires that children under 13 have parental permission to consent to data collection. However, a criticism of this is that children are not required to give joint consent, so because of this, they are not necessarily involved in the consent process. So, continuing with the same question, the recommendations that have been offered by various organizations include the Government Accountability Office, which recommends that there's a coordination plan set up between the agencies, federal agencies, and school districts. CISA has many recommendations, including reducing the school's attack surface by minimizing the number of collaboration tools, as well as extending the school's security policies to distance learning platforms. And then the K-12 6 and 5 Rights Foundation also have recommendations for protecting student privacy and regards to ed tech. So the next question is educating kids about online safety. So there are many different initiatives and campaigns, including Gen Cyber Summer Camp and Google's Be Internet Awesome campaign to get kids interested in cybersecurity and to provide lesson plans and games and those kind of things in the classroom. There's also Stop, Think, Connect and UK Safer Center, which also provide resources. And then there are games such as A Day in the Life of the Joes, which teach about cyberbullying and data privacy and other things. And then Crypto Scratch, which is a block-based programming tool that teaches cryptographic algorithms and schemes. Okay, so with the increased reliance on EdTech and video conferencing tools, this leads to greater vulnerability to cyber attacks and data breaches. So K-12-6 estimates that 20 times more data breaches occur than are publicly disclosed. So schools need to do a better job of reporting these data breaches. And many children lack the knowledge of cybersecurity and privacy principles. So it would be good to have national standards set for K-12 cybersecurity education. So we can see here that there's a increasing trend in Google searches for cybersecurity and also online safety for kids since the pandemic. So the question is, could the growing interest in cybersecurity education campaigns and a cybersecurity workforce gap help to speed up progress in K-12 cybersecurity education? So in conclusion, children are more vulnerable as they spend more time online for schoolwork. So they need to be protected, they need to be educated, and not just with knowledge, but also promoting behavioral change. And so I recommended some future studies, for instance, comparing EdTech privacy policies, K-12 school cybersecurity policies, and how effective K-12 schools teach cybersecurity, and then surveying U.S. children's cybersecurity knowledge in a larger scale than in previous studies. All right, thank you for listening. These are some references, and I'll take questions.
This is not something I see a lot in the news, and so much has been written about schools going online and virtual learning and all of that. But do you think, is it just kind of flying under the radar for a lot of people that maybe there's a hidden risk to this? That
I think so. There have been, I think it was Pew Research, there were some studies that showed how most Americans don't understand, for instance, the risks involved to basically giving away your privacy. Like when you're, agreeing to the privacy terms, for instance, nobody reads that. Nobody's really aware of what's going on with their data. So I think that the general public lacks knowledge in cybersecurity, so I can definitely see it going under the radar for the most part, yes. Yes.
One of the things that you mentioned in there and that you had in one of your slides that was a study that 13% of 189 American students created very strong passwords.
Mm-hmm.
So, in terms of cybersecurity, that's obviously one of the big things. Do you think that if schools are going to do an online element to it, do you think there should be like not an entire class obviously, but do you think that there should be like a better effort to teach students how to create strong passwords?
Oh, definitely. I think it should be built into the curriculum. There's one group of research going on trying to figure out how, I think it's called Pixar, trying to figure out how to train teachers to be able to teach cybersecurity principles, but not necessarily just in a single class, to incorporate it in other classes. So like for instance, maybe a history course or social studies course, they can learn about cryptography. They could learn about the Caesar cipher in a history course, for instance. So not just necessarily just creating a whole class out of it, but integrating it into, different classes. Like for instance, in math class, you might can learn cryptography in the math class, So there's ways that they're trying to figure out how to do it without actually just creating a whole entire curriculum for it. So just incorporating it into different subjects, which I think is really creative.
All right, let's thank our speaker again.